Hello, my name is Elizabeth Bishop and here's my story. I'm an American poet and short story writer. I was born on February 8, 1911 in Worcester, Massachusetts. I had not been very lucky throughout my childhood as my dad died when I was young, which made my mother deeply hurt and had to be sent to a mental asylum. I was only 5 years old when my parents' relatives decided to adopt me. That forced me to move houses a lot, though I felt lonely sometimes, but I have had best friends at Walnut Hill High School who would help me through any tough times. In high school, I chose to study music. I've always had a passion in composing. However, I discovered that I had stage fright, so I chose to major English instead and got to publish my poems in a school magazine. That's why I chose to major English at Vassar College, New York. It was a huge transition for me as that college was much larger than my high school. Eventually, I had to come back to finish my course at Vassar. I managed to scrape by with a passion to go out there and publish my own work. At first, I was rejected by several New York publishers, but I tried and tried. Soon later, I was able to publish my first book of verse, North and South, at Houghton Mifflin in 1946. After that, I slowly gathered a small audience, and my poet career grew from there. 10 years later, I got a Pulitzer Prize for that very book. In 1970, I won the National Book Award for my complete poems. Then I began teaching at Harvard for the next 7 years. I was lucky enough to gain enough money to travel to many countries, something that I've been wanting to do all my life. I traveled to Europe, Africa, even Brazil. Though you might see me as a spontaneous person, but as a poet, I must say I am quite a perfectionist. I usually spend many years composing a poem. I try to avoid any improvisation as I believe accuracy is everything. For example, I've always believed in the significance of experience. That's why I started traveling in the first place. I've always included this kind of fascination of new experiences in the poems I write, usually through imagery to help me explain the philosophy of experiencing life. Though it might seem tedious, every detail has its purpose. Now I'm going to show you my poems that I use completely contrasting structures to create contrasting tones but a common doubtful mood. This one is from my old lover, Tom. Little exercise. Think of the storm roaming the sky uneasily, like a dog looking for a place to sleep in. Listen to it growling. Think how they must look now, the mangrove keys lying out there unresponsive to the lightning, in dark coarse-fibered families, where occasionally a heron may undo his head, shake up his feathers, make an uncertain comment when the surrounding water shines. Think of the boulevard and the little palm trees, all stuck in rows, suddenly revealed as fistfuls of limpfish skeletons. It is raining there, the boulevard and its broken sidewalks with weeds in every crack are relieved to be wet, the sea to be freshened. Now the storm goes away again in a series of small, badly lit battle scenes, each in another part of the field. Think of someone sleeping in the bottom of a rowboat, tied to a mangrove root or a pile of a bridge. Think of him as uninjured, barely disturbed.
At the surface, this poem talks mainly about a walk under an unpleasant environment, but then has a twist at the end in which portrays the ignorance of that very environment. So, as you might see, there is a lot of imagery in this poem, most of which has a negative feeling to them, like stormy sky, lightning, rain, fish skeletons, and battle scenes provide violent, pessimistic, and moody tones. For example, in the first stanza, here I use personification of the sky to say that the sky is taking a walk just like the persona. And I also use a simile to compare it with a dog to express that the sky is walking just as aimlessly as the persona. This is to strengthen the image and mood I want readers to see and feel. After describing the images which are normally perceived as negative, I decided to write about the better side of those things. As in stanza 5, this means that the storm or rain is not always a bad thing, and that some people do get benefits from them. Aside from the poetic devices, What holds the poem together is also the structure. So I use many imperative sentences to emphasize my strong and convincing tone by using repetition of the word think at the beginning of many sentences as a command to make readers think along with my ideas, as seen in stanza 1, 4, 2, and 7. These imperatives help keep me on track with my opinion and maintain the overall tone of the poem. This technique proves to be most effective in the last stanza. Here, it reveals the persona's idea towards tolerance and how it helps us to cope with bad situations. In a metaphorical sense, the someone in this line might refer to a person who ignores negativity and is unaffected by it. So, it basically means that the best way to cope with things you can't control is to ignore them. A real life example of this would be to ignore rumors or bad opinions people say about you. However, I know not all readers are gonna think the way I do, so they are not always convinced when us poets try to directly convince them. Instead, they might feel doubtful as when people are given commands, they often stop to think if they should follow them or not, therefore creating a doubtful mood. For every sentence that starts with think, my question for you is not how you should think, but why should you think the way I tell you to? That brings us to another poem of mine. This one also has a doubtful mood to it. It's called Questions of Travel. This is a long one, so let's break it down. So, this poem mainly questions the purpose of traveling. As a traveler, I can promise you it is hard to find a place to call home when you've been to so many places. This feeling is what drives me to write this poem. I want to explore the reasons why people travel in the first place. In the first two stanzas, I present to you the disadvantages of traveling. Though traveling might be perceived as a positive activity, it can be seen as negative as well, even for me. For example, in the first two lines, the persona doesn't like this place because it is crowded and chaotic. To make readers think along with me, I first question the beauty of nature, whether it is worth it to travel to see such thing. And then, in the second stanza, I dive deeper into the action of traveling. Is it worth the energy? As seen in line 6 to 8. This shows a gradation within the process of thinking. Just like when people question, they think deeper and deeper to get to the root of the answer. Structurally, in contrast with the previous poem, I use question to form sentences instead of imperatives, in order to produce a doubtful mood and a doubtful tone. After providing some disadvantages of traveling, I decided to look for the advantages, just like I did with the unpleasant environment in the first poem, but in a more sudden way, by thinking about what the persona would miss if he or she decided not to have traveled. But we can get something meaningful out of them through acceptance and an open mind. There's a slight irony in this whole section in that the persona would regret the things that they have done if they haven't done it. But those things that they have done is not entirely pleasant. Next, as I have said in the first part, this poem uses a lot of rhetorical questions to express the theme of the reasons to travel. Most of these questions are packed in stanza 2. For example, this is the first question that appears in the poem, so it is intended to set the tone of doubt and make readers think if they would rather stay home or travel, and why. And then we see another question. This line talks about the unexplainable stonework, whether it is supposed to please our vision. And another question. So this line translates to, do we really need to see what we imagine in order to prove that it's real? So these questions are what create the doubtful mood to readers. To top it all off, in the second to last stanza, I use the irony of questioning a questioner to boost the doubtful mood. So this is an illusion. Pascal is a French philosopher. He once said that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. This statement shows the disadvantage of traveling again to prepare readers for the last stanza. I purposely provide with this last piece of information before they go and decide whether traveling is a worthwhile activity. Hence the last sentence. Ending with a question makes readers continue to think even after the poem has ended.
After all, I communicate what I learned in life through detailed and poetic language to achieve my objective as a poet, to make my readers value their present as they experience them.